I'm not completely outside Poets of the East, but he is the very core of this program. So it is impossible to say, let me introduce within Poets of the East the creator of Poets of the East. But that's the situation now. I have the privilege to be the moderator, to be the host of this special edition of Poets of the East, when its creator, Rick Spisak, poet of the Three Rivers and information sculptor, is going to be also the hero and the guest of this program. And I have to admit that during those 2 years, I guess, it has lasted until now, we managed to create a certain network of poets from far West America, far South America, until New Zealand and Japan and Indian world and Arab world and so on. So actually, Poets of the East became a little bit poets from everywhere, because as we repeated so many times during this program, there is also some point east of the point we are that moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what could be Easter than Rick Spisak today, but for sure, Poets of the East, it's the central point of this very special edition of the program, and I'm proud and happy, if not to introduce, because I repeat, he doesn't need to be introduced, he doesn't need to be presented, at least to warmly welcome here a poet, a social and political activist, a media maestro, and all in all an artist, but in the same time a teacher, a professor, and a scholar. Ladies and gentlemen, in two words, Rick Spisak. Rick Spisak, welcome at your Poets of the East.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you so much. I am blush. Even my blushes are blushing.
Ladies and gentlemen, this man can't manage it without a game of words, even outside its poetry. And believe me, this is only the first verse which is going to resound here during this program. I'm sure that my blushing is blushing or something like this. It's going to appear as a verse within one of his poems. And because you mentioned about it, Rick, when did you start loving so much those games of words? I have to admit, I love them too, but I am not able to work with them in such a measure as you do. You're able to make a game of words within the same word. How do you manage?
Well, my brother, thank you so much for that effusive, incredible introduction. I have to say, I was fortunate that even as a young child, my own mother read to us, wrote poetry, drew little drawings, and I never lived a moment without thinking that I could capture this with words, with a drawing, with a sketch. And it was and remains one of the joys of my life that I know so many creative souls who share the blood of their heart. I can't say it any more plainly, any more simply, any more directly. What we find in the treasure of artists, of poets especially, is that need, the desire to share the best within us. And that, my brother, that keeps me going. Regardless, as you mentioned, I'm a bit of a political person, an advocate, and I couldn't keep up my advocacy if I didn't get that jolt of love and energy and truth that I get from poets. Yourself, my brother, most especially, you have been a joy to me, a treasure, and your own eloquence, your scholarship, your love of poetry as well has been a stalwart part of this Poets of the East. So I thank you for that. So yeah, I've been scribbling for a long time.
Thank you for this, and thank you for actually coming with this idea and stimulating us, everybody, all of us, which belonged more or less to this program. Do you remember, Rick, actually, how did this appear? We were actually waiting to a program made by our friend Gobinda Biswas, and it was a problem with the electrical current, so we couldn't connect anymore, and we were a lot of poets from all of the world, and we started to recite our poetries, our poems, and this was actually the first Poets of the East edition, because another program didn't wasn't able to start because of technical reasons in the moment they had to start. You know, sometimes it happens that things we can't imagine, things we can't review, actually determine some of our deeds, and some things we couldn't eventually imagine they could have appeared uh, without this. So at Poets of the East, we had poets from Czech Republic, from the United States, from Hungary, from England, from the United Kingdom, all from India, from Singapore, a lot of great poets. Please tell me, if you were to choose an ideal team of three poets in order to make a golden edition of Poets of the East, whom would you
Wow. That's a
select?
toughie, brother. That's a toughie. You and I both know, um, we know a dozen, 100, hundreds of just extraordinary voices. And, so many people who do not know poetry think of it as people who will write about flowers or maybe the change of season, and they belong in a cloister in a college forum someplace. But you and I know how vital, how real, how powerful these people who call themselves poets, who not by choice but by necessity have to somehow sculpt in words and ideas truths that are impossible any other way. And oh brother, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to fail at that miserably. I can tell you 100. I can tell you 200. I couldn't tell you three. I couldn't tell you three unless they start with Mircea Dan Duta, and
Oh,
that's a good start.
well, I'm not sure. I'm afraid that if you start with this one, I don't know if you know him. He's a very suspect individual. Really, I know him. I know him better. Your your program is going to bankrupt. So take care.
uh,
Well, what about starting with that guy? We are dedicating some readings, some lectures from time to time. That wheel or something. That one with the Julius Caesar and other poets like this. Maybe a golden edition could be William Shakespeare. Let's say Edgar Allan Poe, and let's take someone from Europe as well, Charles Baudelaire.
all
It's
good
all right.
choices. All good choices.
That's all right. So we have the team for the next Poets of the East.
There
I
you
will
go.
call I will call them, and only to find. I hope they will find some common space, some common time to, because they are very busy people. You know,
Yes, I can
everybody
only
wants.
imagine.
Yes, they are really very busy people. So Rick, tell me please, in because you have already mentioned that actually poetry was a part, such an important part of your childhood. When this social and political involvement of yours started in poetry, because one of your beliefs is that the poet has a mission, the poet has an obligation, has to serve some goal. When did you start feeling like this? And did this appear before the love for poetry, or it developed together with this?
Very good question, my brother. I can tell you precisely and very, very accurately. When I was a young man, probably 12 or 13, in my school, which at that point we call it seventh grade, um, here I was in an English class, and I loved, as you can well imagine, loved reading and all that. And I was asked, my class was asked to write a poem about Native Americans, okay, indigenous people. And it was so fortuitous because I had read early a, a biography of a great Native American leader, a gentleman who we call Sitting Bull. And I was so touched by a perception of his. He mentions traveling from his home on the plains with his people to Washington, D.C. by train. And it was very much a stranger in a strange land, traveling into this white civilization, this European American civilization. And he describes being appalled, saddened, because the poverty, the hunger, the sickness, the terrible noise and cacophony, clearly in just the way people treated each other, he saw himself as in hell. He could not believe that this is what passed for Euro-American civilization. He was appalled. And he thought, and it was reported in the book, he said, no person, not the poorest person in any Indian village would be allowed to be so sick, would be allowed to be so poor, would allowed to live in the rough, out of doors without a home. And he couldn't believe that people who profess to love one another could allow something like that and call it a civilization. And that struck me so profoundly because even though I was living a working class existence, I saw poverty. I saw this brutality of the economic disaster of dark capitalism. So I was so sympathetic to that. Well, when I was tasked to write a poem about Native Americans, I thought, that's interesting. Write a poem about it. And Mircea, I know that poem to this day.
Please.
When I go hunting for the bear, my hunting bow and arrows I wear. I see the bear go to his cave to quarter me. Oh, what a knave. I put an arrow on my bow. I swiftly bend and let it go. The arrow barely pierced his side, but even that could break his stride. The bear slowed down and then he stopped. By then, I think I could have dropped. The bear stood still and looked at me, and then I knew this had to be the end.
In the same time, is sad, is sensitive, but it keeps a trace of hope in it. And I think this is actually a description in very small words of your soul, of your human and poetical soul, which I discover actually in each of your poems. Tell me, Rick, how old or how young were you when you wrote this poem?
Probably 12 or 13.
Oh, this is great. It's wonderful. You wrote like this when you were 12. Oh my God, all my admiration. And what about your parents? Did they love this poem?
Well, my mother was a little more sympathetic to this than my father was. My father was not a man with a lot of education. He had a very, very mild respect for the arts. He was not. He didn't know that, to me, art was life. He didn't know that music was life, and it was interesting to me. A man who was very, very firm of purpose, never really cared for the arts, was not a big reader, certainly didn't follow closely music. He allowed me to convince him when I was actually 8 years old that I needed to learn trumpet. So when I was still in elementary school in second grade, I was able to talk my way into the elementary school band 2 years ahead of what my fellows were doing. And I said, listen, I want to learn this so bad. And I was one of those little musical maniacs. I practiced 2 hours a day because I knew that's what it took to get good. And it was a way of immersing myself in the arts and spending time in that dream space that artists live in. Uh, I must have started playing Blue Danube when I was 12 or 13, and the Danube has meant something to my heart. Strauss, Mozart, these fellows, they are the guardians of my heart. And poetry to me is just another part of music.
This is wonderful, and it's a very original and unexpected way you described all of this, because actually you made also the contact, and I think it was intentional with your Central European roots, because Danube is to be found, I think, in as one of the motives, even if it is invisible, but it is there, one of the motives of your poetry and of this Central Europe, which is actually so present in you. And given all this, I allow myself, and I kindly please accept another question, which was not on the list initially. Tell me, please, uh, this Central Europe origins of yours had some role in your formation as an artist? I mean, in your family, as far as I know, you were talking only English. Did you?
That's true.
Um, is there a part, or was there a part of your family, or maybe grandparents, you were talking also in Slovak, or?
Yes, yes. Um, my my maternal grandmother and grandfather were still with me through my young years, and they spoke, I would say, 50-50 Slovak and English. And my grandfather listened to Slovak music, Slovak news, smattering of English news, but mostly Slovak news and music. So those beloved moments with grandparents in my heart are intrinsically connected. And my family, when I grew up, was in a town called Pennsylvania, a very Eastern European town. The community that they lived in, my grandmother had a Polak on one side, a Hungarian on the other side, and a Russian on the other side. So she was a polyglot. She spoke enough Hungarian, enough Polish, enough Russian, and lived very much in a 80% Slovak world, 20% English world. And unfortunately, the social pressure, because American emigres at the turn of the century, 1900, were pressed very hard to get American. There was the crazy anti-communist nonsense, and there has always been an America first mentality in a lot, and a lot of fear and worry about European emigres in that area of the 1900s. So they were practicing very hard, trying to speak English all the time. So it was almost discouraged, to learn Slovak. And when in my early teens I started collecting Slovak words, because I thought this is terrible, that generation is fading away, into old age, and to think that knowledge, that language would disappear with their generation, that was horrible. So I made a little list, Rick's list of Slovak words, and I kept this with me. And I guess it was in my 30s, I met my first Czech person in America, and I said, oh, I got to ask you. I said, I'm sure that part of this Rick's Slovak dictionary, if you will, is very idiosyncratic, is very much the pet names for things. But I said, could I please show you this and get your reaction? And this young lady, when she looked at it, she goes, oh, that's so cute. Oh, that's so cute. Because it was the family nicknames for each other and the kind of child talk, baby talk the kids had. And it was by no means any kind of formal Czechoslovak, but it was the language they used. They refused, my grandparents and aunts and uncles refused to tell me any of the swear words, although I knew a few. But it is a small part of my legacy. I can't tell you how much I regret. I took German in high school. They didn't offer any Eastern European languages, not even Russian, in school when I was attending. So I had a choice of Italian, French, or German. I took German because I always thought there was more drama in German. I mean, a word like ausgezeichnet. How could you go wrong? I mean, that's a word.
Tell me, please, do you have some poems from the time? I mean, from the time you were combining this pet Slovak, this Rick Slovak dictionary?
No, I really didn't. Um, while I wrote a bit of poetry in that early preteen, early teen years, um, I decided that since I was a serious artist and a serious writer, I had to write in a serious milieu. So I started writing short stories, and I got myself a tape recorder. You'll be shocked to hear this. I got a tape recorder, and I went around and did interviews.
This is
So
great.
so I was doing interviews then, and in my artist life, I was very focused on music, and my family relocated from Pennsylvania down to Florida, and it was a huge culture shock because in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, there were very much ethnic communities. There was the German part of Pittsburgh, there was the Slovak part of Pittsburgh, the Hungarian, and of course African American portion, and then the generic American, if you will. And I was so shocked because when I came to Florida, there was this hard, fast line between these still very openly, legally racist cracker white people and the black community and the growing Hispanic community. And there was this funny public debate how onerous it was, how insulting it was that Spanish speaking people from Cuba, from Central and South America, dared dared to not learn English. It was a and I saw it completely differently. I said, my God, in Pennsylvania, my aunts and uncles, my grandparents spoke two and three languages. What's the big deal about learning a second one? My goodness, don't you even get the idea of being a good neighbor? And so there was not that. So I was really very much music focused, and I saw myself. I had been picked to conduct the symphony orchestra in Pennsylvania. So in my early high school years, I was conducting 100 students. I was selected to be the drum major, so I would have been the conductor and leader in the marching band and in the other musical ensembles of the school. But then moving to Florida, it was a whole different thing because there was a very different culture. There was lip service paid to serious music. The band leader was an unrepentant racist who didn't allow black children or brown children. Only white children were allowed in his bands, the orchestra, all the ensembles. And now this in a time in America when African Americans are being beaten in the streets for daring to want to sit at the lunch counter. And at the same time, this Vietnam War was growing and growing and growing, and it was so clearly racist. It was so clearly racist. And as a young artist, I I would not sit still for playing in an ensemble where African American students weren't allowed, where Hispanic students weren't allowed. That was appalling. So with a few fellows, we went to the band director and said, "You got to stop this. This is terrible. This is terrible." And he said, "Well, this is the way I'm running it. If you don't like it, get out." Well, a very, very interesting dilemma because my big artistic outlet was music, but I didn't want to support that, so I had to quit. And here I am, an artist, a musician, and I can't do music anymore. The band director was such a unrepentant racist. And finally, in my senior year, they adjusted the teachers, and a black teacher from a black high school came to our school, and they sent Joe Bragg to the black school where he lasted a month and then quit. And so I was able to come back to music, but I had, because there were no opportunities to play classical music, what I called serious music. The other kind of music that I loved, that I'd taken to my heart, was jazz. So in the rock and roll 60s, 65 through 69, when all my friends were rocking out to Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones and all that, I had a band that played 1920s and 1930s music from New Orleans. So I was playing Dixieland with my band, and as you can imagine, there weren't a lot of jobs for a band playing 1920s jazz music from New Orleans.
And in the 60s, actually, like you mentioned very well, the rock and roll was on the first place. But in the same time, I think this was also your way of expressing your love and your empathy for the Afro-American population and its music, because you express this also through the fact of singing, of playing what they used to compose 30 or 100 years ago. And I think this was a trend which expressed very much not only your artistic belief, but also your social belief you were talking about. And tell me, from this part of your artistic evolution, when actually this social dimension is so strong and it is actually so complexly combined with this other artistic one, did you still write, or did you start to write poems, or it was also still music, only music?
Well, that you've keyed right in on the important part. This is, as I said, the Vietnam War era, the Black Liberation Movement, women's rights. So I picked up my pen again, and I started writing and doing political cartoons about the Vietnam War. And I got a chance to do some public speaking. I got involved with what was called underground newspapers, the anti-draft, the anti-war community, and started up newspapers. And as you can well imagine, in the psychedelic era of the late 60s, anything right, just right. And it suited my writing style because I, as you well know, I'm a polemicist. I take pungent stands on important issues and try to keep a little humor in there. But yeah, I was the right artist at the right time for that particular thing. And so I wrote and spoke and cartooned against the war, against racism, against sexism. It was a dramatic time to be a poet. It is
Tell me,
today.
Rick, yes, you are right, just like today. Could I kindly ask you, if you want, of course, I know very well that each poet prefers reading new things, the newest things he or she wrote. Could I kindly ask you, only if you want, to read something from that time, if you want, of course?
Well, I have to put this in a context, okay? Now, because like so many of us in that radical period, we rejected, now not nihilism, not destroy the museums, but the desire to take art from the pedestal, to give it to the worker, to take fine art, even poetry and music, to take it off that pedestal. It's not that thing that somebody used to do once upon a time, but something that's vital and real and addresses our time. Well, although I kept a journal, okay, eventually, my
Wow.
writing from the late 60s and early 70s, because I was an aggressive anti-institutionalist, I'm going to say, I insisted that I would not put my work down in a book. I wouldn't put it, in any sturdy media. I would grab any random piece of paper. And so I ended up with drawers full of torn paper bags, backs of bills, um, a polemic piece on one side and my poem on the other. So I just had this huge package of random notes on random pieces of paper. And I finally had to decide, look, you are a serious writer. You need to keep your material in a secure way. So I literally now have about 30 years of notebooks.
This is incredible. This
And
is
there's stories, poems, and pictures, and articles, and cutouts, and drawings, and I Ching casts, and tarot readings, and all kinds of research and reports. I was very involved with meditation. I was very involved in comparative religious study. I read the Quran, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Tibetan Book of the Dead, Egyptian Book of the Dead. I even read the Urantia book, the Book of Mormon, probably 6 different Bibles, because I really wanted to understand. I don't know if I told you this story. One of the other pivotal things in my life that really changed me was I was raised Catholic, and and I was the kid that asked too many questions. You know what I mean? And I
I know something about it.
I suspect that you do, my brother. But they threw me out of class because I asked questions. I said, look, if you're a being of infinite lifespan, what's 3 days of torture to you? Not
Oh
much.
my God.
Well, as you can see, I was asking really inappropriate questions. I asked a nun one time. I said, look, how can you speak love when you don't know love, not human love? And spiritual love is wonderful, but you don't know human love. How can you speak to that? you know and of course I relished pointing out the absurdities in the Bible, again, none of which ingratiated me. So during my training for confirmation, right, again, 10, 12 years old,
Yes.
thrown out of the classroom, I did not hear, and at the concluding part of the ritual in our church, our Catholic church, you were to kiss the bishop's ring, who was the officiating priest, right? Well, I hadn't heard that. It was completely news to me. Now I'm an S, right? I'm at the end of this long line of basically every kid I knew, all the Catholic kids that I grew up with. I'm in this long line and they're all kissing the bishop's ring. Well, I'm with Blake on these matters. Jesus didn't ask anyone to kiss his ring. He washed their feet. This is not what Jesus would do. Jesus would say, "Thank you for coming to me for a blessing. Let me wash your feet." Not imperious Rome, "Kiss my hand, plebeian." And so as I'm standing in this long line, okay, in my mind's eye, I can see the founders of America, Jefferson and Tom Paine and Adams, and they're saying, we put an end to royalty. We put an end to priestcraft with government. We are free, independent men. We don't do that. We don't kiss the ring of some pontiff or some king or some prince or some feudal lord. We don't do that anymore because we are all equal. And I thought, particularly a follower of Christ couldn't fail to understand that this was not a Jesus-like behavior. Now, not being an idiot, I thought, all right, yeah, sure. Isn't that nice that you understand this? Now, put that knowledge aside and just go through the motions, do the thing, don't rock the boat. I mean, all these things. We're intelligent people. We don't think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to take a radical stand and everything will be fine because I knew. I knew it was not going to be fine. I had 12 relatives out in the church, waiting for me to become confirmed and be a soldier of Christ and all that jazz. So my plan was just to kiss his ring, move on, forget about it. It's going to take 2 seconds, maybe. Just do it. I couldn't do it. He put his hand up for me to kiss. I shook it.
Nevertheless, I think that the inner man, the inner human being in your spirit made this escape. You remained there when they put the hand like this on you, but your inner you remained there and continued on the same line. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I felt like mentioning this.
It's okay. It's okay. So he puts his hand in my face again and said, "Kiss it." Now, he said "kiss it" in a really not nice way. And so I shook it again, and in front of the entire congregation, right? And I was like toward the very end of the line, so there's really like 1 or 2 kids, so there's everyone can see. And he said, "Get out of my church right now. I don't ever want to see you again." And there was a door relatively close where I was at the altar, so I won now. As you can well imagine, it put a real crimp in the celebration back at my parents' house.
Oh my God.
So
it was like excommunication.
Exactly. So of course, my parents in that era believed in corporal punishment, so I was whipped. But I knew in my heart I had done the right thing. And so I prayed to my angel because I remain a very spiritual person. I prayed to my angel. I said, "Help me understand the teachings of God to humans." So I said, "I will take a vow to read every holy book I can." And that's why I read the Quran, the Upanishads, etc., because I really wanted to understand. I wanted to do the right thing. And it seemed to me that that priest and that process and that ritual with that conclusion was absolutely wrong and was just not Jesus-like in the least. And I've become more gentle in my judgment on that fellow and his ritual, but I see people every bit as spiritual. The most unlettered, unschooled, unchurched person. I have met people who were so spiritually inspired who had no churching at all, and it has nothing to do with anything. But it was a pivotal moment for me because I I knew I was science was the path for me, and so science and poetry and my music have given me such a wonderful life. And the people that I have learned to love over the years make my heart full. So, no, I don't have anything from that era, sadly. Probably the earliest thing I have, other than that one poem that I recited, I've got something probably from the early 70s. I've got something from there.
Well, I would kindly ask you to read it, but please allow me one sentence before this. I remember a classical American film from the late 60s, I guess. The well, I think it was The Night of the Iguana.
Oh
And
yes, oh yes, wonderful film.
it's wonderful film, and it started with the excommunication of that young priest, if you remember. And when you were telling me all that story, I couldn't help myself but imagining how actually your experiences were parallel. And in his way, he told them, he told his believers or the church's believers, you destroyed the God of mildness, you destroyed the God of goodness, and you invented that intolerant old person. And I have the feeling that you destroyed that revolutionary, strictly radical Jesus, and you rediscovered the real part, the mild and the kind part of Jesus, which actually was coming back in order to bring peace and in order to make us understand between each other. That's what I felt. I couldn't help myself. I felt that parallel between you and that young excommunicated priest from that movie. And now, please, if you would like, read for us something from your seventeens. Sorry, because
It's
uh,
okay. Before I do that, I have to say, in response to your mentioning of my one of my favorite films, Night of the Iguana, how calmly does the olive branch precede the sky, begin to blanch, without a cry, without a prayer, with no betrayal of despair. Good stuff, brother. Good
my
stuff.
God, I was hypnotized when I was watching this movie, and it happened that it had an excellent translation into Czech, and I was hypnotized by the verses, by the poem itself, and also by that fantastic translation into Czech. It was, I mean, and that fixed camera on him and his old voice reciting all this, and everybody around him stoned, hypnotized by that wonderful poem. And long, long after his death, I mean, he died. You remember at the end of that poem,
Oh yes.
it was it was that young lady who she was already crying. Grandpa, you wrote such a wonderful poem. Sorry, it's just that
Oh,
this
brother.
film.
Listen, you can talk about that anytime. I absolutely with you. I've probably seen it 100 times, and I never miss feeling that incredibly powerful piece. And I've wondered, was that part of the original book? I haven't read the original book, and it's on my list to do to see is that poem produced exactly that way, or was it something created for the moment?
No,
Just
no, it
just
is in the book. You'll see, it is in the book, in the original book, because it happened that, but I'm telling this only during your searching of your poem, because this was one of the first movies I made an exam for the Film Academy in Bucharest,
oh
and
really?
yes, and reading the book, the original book, the film was made up, was an obligation. So I had to compare, and as far as I remember, it was the same stuff.
This is a piece, as you know, so many people who have died needlessly and who policemen full of hate have killed. And I was stunned by one of these murders. I kept saying to myself, why has no one explained that recognizing in groups and out groups is normal, it's biological, but it doesn't need to be war. It doesn't need to be anger. It doesn't need to be a sharp cutting edge. It's a place where we come together, you know? An edge can be that too. So I wrote this. It's called A Behaviorist Perspective, the Causes of Racism. The troop or group, the clan's glad hand, the sign of nine, the grip in the dark, the posted mark informs the stable state of norms. Remembering the frames of membrane games, brain disguises, shade your eyes in apple pies, it sizes the territory, the turf. Well, the good should. Our side of town, our group is right in the sight of good God's smile. Even sunlight reviles your kind, outside the pure, to lure with your kind's lazy, stupid stunts. A sparrow of a different hue could be torn and clove in two by a few of another blue hunt. The strength, bounding, bonding, unicellular life in multicellular strife, responding, besiding, ties the atom so tight, minute, molecular might, and chooses, in precise measure, who you'll sleep with tonight. Beehives survive by tribes' trance. The queen's romance excludes the rude outsider, protects the provider, determines the rider of the queen's desire, embolden invaders, reduce the chance for the tribe to advance. Social groups and bamboo shoots, baboon troops and fishy schools know who the foe is, who's the friend, where's the end. The rules used, training fools by gene and team wish, that's culture's dish. It keeps the Portuguese men of war banging on the door. It explains to the colony who to hang on to and why. Cultural clash, like red ants and black as a reason to attack, is a common step to keep 'em hep to good guys and bad. But isn't it sad how often the supportive social ties, the tools of molecular rules, can conceal the lack and leak of the social contract to the greater stack? The organs of your hand would be foolish to war or inflict harm on the arm. Could the leg force the knee to submit or flee? Could the brow to the forehead say, drop dead, be gone, amscre, and then in confusion sway against the neighbor's array? As this is, to make a fist, to relate the cultural trait, a boundary in this or any country, take Humpty Dumpty. He's really something, to relate to the ground with a loud cracking sound. Unicellular or multicellular, in clothing and in motion, you're expressing the notion of your tribe. It doesn't hide, wouldn't try. But membranes even say, if you lean over easy this way, together is stronger, lives happier longer. Cultural rifts needn't cause tiffs, or express fists in pain what it is when they mean the support of us. They needn't bleed trust, or force us to must the membrane's edgy thrust. But if you say it must, symbiosis is being, osmosis its meaning. Surely you know this. There's no relief in grief. Let tribal libel cease. Extend the grace of space. The use of social bonding to unite is great. But even edges meet and act to attract the surging urge to merge.
My God, I was hypnotized. I was completely hypnotized because on one hand, it is a younger and more dynamic and energetic Rick, and in the same time, the same poet, the same rhythm, and the same motives, those unexpected rhymes which actually in the last moment change the meaning of what you want to express, not ever losing the sense of civil, not ever losing the sense of social in within all of this. Yes, Rick, you were in your way. You were a revolutionary of the '60s. You were a beatnik, and it was actually I think it was the most living and the most spontaneous form of art at that moment. And I feel myself privileged that I have this possibility, this opportunity to talk with you about this. Tell me, please, what happened in the '70s? I have the feeling that it was a complete turner on the right, that all this beatnik and 60-like feeling somehow diminished, and uh, much more right-wing tendency took the initiative, not only in politics with Gerald Ford at the leading of the country, but also in art. At least judging after the cinema. But what happened to art? What happened to your art?
Well, I I graduated high school in 1970, and I was very actively involved in the counterculture. Um, Part of my religious studies had led me to meditation. And I can put it really simply. I mean, I did not, well, let me put it this way. I'd been intrigued. I kind of put myself on this mission to read all these different religious books, right? And one of my interests had always been in psychology, in studying how effectively we use our brains, okay? Because I had heard, like so many of us, that, oh, we only use 10% of our brain, or we only use a small portion of our brain, whatever that statement is. What it means to me is that you're leaving an awful lot on the table. So I said, now wait a minute. I'm not the only one who thinks this. There must have been bright people from the past who've explored what kinds of techniques can enhance the brain. Okay. So, of course, meditation came about. There were in the 70s many, many schools of mental discipline, of mental training, from Scientology to uh, uh, Silva mind control, a lot of different groups. That, of course, the traditional yoga schools, Sufi schools, the Hare Krishna people, lots of yoga schools. There were astrology schools and all this kind of thing. Well, um, I got married in 1970. I married my high school sweetheart. We're still married 52 years later. We're both artists, so we allow each other a little latitude in terms of crazy ideas. Um, but we also, after living together alone for about 2 years, we moved into a commune. And we moved through much of the 70s into one commune, then another, then another, then another. And these were for multiple reasons. On the one hand, it was to keep the expenses down. The second reason was because we were artists, we were musicians, and we wanted to live with other artists and other musicians. We wanted to create a lifestyle where we could create an event, we could create an art piece, we could perform political theater. We used to do spontaneous guerrilla theater. And one of the ways we would do this, we would go to these events, rock festivals, concerts, and stuff, and we would perform theater. And one of my most fun things was we would go to a shopping mall. Now, shopping, as you know, in America is a sacred thing. So to disrupt this sacred activity, one of us, and it was quite often me, would stand in a shopping cart. Okay, picture a shopping cart. And then I would recite William Blake. I would recite Jim Morrison. I would recite Rick Spisak. And I would be rolled through the middle of this shopping district while orating. It was, we enjoyed it. It was tremendous. We would do big art projects. One of my proudest moments, I was thrown out of a free school for not being Marxist enough. But from this study of both living art and then also these different meditation schools, I began what I considered a serious analysis of different mental development techniques, right? So from this one, from that one, they gave me ideas. So I ended up developing a series of techniques to enhance awareness. Okay. Now, I thought of this as strictly my own research, that I would eventually publish it, in terms of a research project per se. But in the interim, I was just conducting these experiments. I would meet with psychics, I would meet with astrologers, I would meet with mediums, and try to glean how did they get there. What was the old interviewer talk to them about how they got to learn this. How did you do? What did you study? What did you do? And at one point, I was living in a commune. The commune was invited to go out west to what was called a World Family Gathering, and I wasn't worried about working. I just did whatever I needed to do to put enough contribution into the commune to keep it going, right? I had no thought. I thought, a spiritually interested poet, light artist, what job would even fit me? I couldn't imagine something like that. But anyway, so we planned on going to this festival, and on the way out there, we stopped in New Mexico in a park, and the thought struck me that one of the things that Native American young men do is they go into a forest and they wait for that inspiration, that dream that's going to tell them what their life path is. And so I told my friends, I said, listen, I'm going to go up in the mountain and I'm going to wait and get a vision. And they said, seriously? I mean, we're on our way to this World Family Gathering thing and you're going to go and just sit on a mountain? Are you crazy? Well, yeah, I'm crazy enough. So I go up in this mountain and all I took was my journal at the time and my sleeping bag and some water, and I was going to fast and get my vision, right? The next morning,
Whoa.
the next morning, I didn't realize it, but I set my sleeping bag up relatively close to a path, and there is a Native American gentleman walking up the path. I said, good morning. He said, I dreamt about you last night. And I thought, oh, yeah, I bet. I figured my friends down in the valley had put him up to it. And I said, yeah, really? What'd you dream? And he said, I dreamt you're going to go back to Miami and get a job in television. And I said, what? That's ridiculous. And I told him for about how ridiculous that was. It was impossible. I didn't have credentials for it. I didn't know anybody in television. Who you know is very, very important. And I said, no, it was impossible. He said, no, you're going. I said, I guess they put you up to this. He said, well, I'm coming from Arizona. What are you talking about? And I said, you weren't down in the valley down there? And he said, no, I'm coming from over there. Okay. Long story short, you can read about it in my book, first book, Two Small Windows and a Pair of Mirror Doors. But it's called Navajo, Arizona, population 64. It's a really good story. Anyway, so I go back to Miami. My wife gets a job instantly, and I'm still looking and I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm looking and I'll take anything. I don't care, but I'm not getting anything. Well, I noticed that driving her to work, I was driving right past the TV studio. So my wife says, Rick, why don't you go ask? I said, I'm going to go say, a poet light artist is looking for a job. What do you got? It's just absurd. Well, of course, I'm very familiar with the absurd. It's a close friend of mine. So I finally went, talked to some people there. They said, well, we're not really looking for a poet or a light artist, but we'll keep you on the list. So now, meanwhile, part of the 70s and late 60s was experiments in psychedelics as an augment. And some other time we'll talk about that, but take it that I was doing LSD and psilocybin and mescaline and peyote for spiritual purposes. Okay. If
It's
you
something I didn't know
control,
about you. We should talk about it sometime because
it's very, very well documented that if you prepare yourself to have a spiritual trip, you will have a spiritual trip. No question about it. So this is what I've been doing. And one afternoon, I was coming to pick up my wife, and I had taken LSD earlier, and I probably really shouldn't have been driving, but I was driving to go pick her up, and I'm dressed very casually. I had, just a t-shirt on and some torn, ragged shorts, and my wife said, "Darling, when's the last time you went by the studio?" And I said, "I don't remember, but it's not lately, and I'm not really dressed. I'm not presentable." She said, "Look, it's been a while. Just poke your head in the door and see." Now, I didn't even have shoes on, okay? I'm barefooted. So I said, "Okay, fine. I'll go." So I go over to the front door of this TV studio, very, very large studio, knock on the door, walk in, say to the reception, I'm just hoping I'll see the receptionist and then leave. She said, "Oh, Rick, we were waiting for you. Come on in." And I went, I'm really not, dressed or anything. She said, "Oh, no, don't worry about it. Just come on in." I said, "Well, who wants to see me?" And she said, "Oh, the studio executive producer wants to meet you." And I went, "Oh my God. Oh my God. Fine." So I go into the executive producer, the head man at the whole studio, and he said, "So I understand you're a light artist and a poet." And I said, "Yes, sir. I'm not sure what that really qualifies me for." But he goes, "It's very interesting. So listen, let me ask you, do you have a pair of shoes?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you have a shirt and pants?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Do you have a driver's license?" I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Okay, fine. Would you like to start on Monday as a driver?" I said, "Sure. Great." Well, in 3 months, I was made in charge of the film library. And in 3 more months, I was hired to be trained as an editor to edit television. Now, while I'm back there in the library, this young man walks in. He was a film student at the local college. He said, "Richard, I've been talking to people and they say that like you're interested in meditation and that you read all these books and stuff. So you're really into it, right?" And I said, "Well, I'm researching it. I wouldn't say, He goes, "So you're a guru." And I go, No, I'm not no. I'm a researcher. I'm doing scientific study." I said, "There's this lovely poem. I make no reliance on virgin or pigeon. I use the method of science to the aim of religion. That's that's what I do." He said, "Well, great. This is fantastic." He said, "I would like you to be on a television show." And I said, "Oh, no. He said, "Wait a minute. Wait. You do tarot readings, right?" I go, No. Okay, wait. I do research with different forms of divination, the I Ching, tarot. Yeah, I do some of that." I said, "But I'm not a teacher. I'm not a guru. I just a researcher." And he goes, "Well, that's perfect." He goes, "Right now, all I've got is the Amazing Sammy." And I went, "Oh my God, the Amazing Sammy?" He said, "Yeah, it's a spiritual show, and I've got the Amazing Sammy." And I said, "Well, it sounds to me like the Amazing Sammy is one of those guys that does card tricks and stuff." And he goes, "Oh yeah, that's what he does. He does card tricks." I went, "Okay, you should not be representing this as a spiritual show if what you've got is a guy that does card tricks. That's absurd." And he goes, "Well, that's why you're the perfect guy." And I went, "Okay,
Incredible.
I tell you what I do." I said, "I have written up 100-question questionnaire before I do a tarot experiment. And this way they fill it out. And if there's something, this way at the end, after the reading, they can say he spoke specifically to certain things, or was it just like, you're going to travel, you're going to meet somebody, and generic stuff like that." He
Yes,
said, "Oh,
yes.
that's perfect. That's perfect. That's great." I said, "Okay, all right, I'll do it." So I go to the college. I sit down on the studio. There's two people I'm gonna do a reading for, and I talk about meditation. I talk about the different techniques that you can use. I talk about Kundalini meditation and pranayama meditation, and there's Bhakti yoga. There's all different kinds of spiritual disciplines you can use. And I said, I've also been studying divination, so I'm going to do a reading for you. So I did a reading for these two people. It turns out that one of them was the head of the anthropology department.
Wow.
And he had made a specific life search on spiritual matters, on psychic ability, on ESP and stuff like that. The
Yeah.
other person was the woman in charge of all student activities. So she's heard every, story, lecture, blah, 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 blah. She's heard it all. And they were both stunned. The anthropology professor said, "Listen, I'd like to arrange to have you come and lecture at my class. You have get the best explanation of meditation I've ever heard." And he said, "You have a mechanical explanation of mantra. You talk about the biophysics of chanting, of pranayama. He said, would you come and lecture? And she said, wait a minute. I want to hire you for 5 lectures. Would $500 a lecture be adequate? And I was going to say, well, you don't have to pay. But before I can do that, my wife goes, boom, hits me. Yes, that'll be fine. Yes, yes. Because she knew I would have done it for free. So at the end of that, I had to concede that probably I am a spiritual person, and probably merely calling myself a researcher is kind of not quite the
Well,
full case.
being a researcher, I think this is not incompatible with being a spiritual person. You have your own way, your personal way of researching. And actually, everything you told me, starting from that coming back from the mountain when you heard about that television hiring, and until that moment, your wife actually brought you back on the earth with that bumping into and determining you being more realistic. It was actually a way of the researcher in you knowing little by little the realistic world. It had to write about it in a spiritual way. And now, would you like to read something from that era, Rick? If you have something in
Yeah,
your,
let me find one of those. Just take a second. Okay, so this was written back in that era.
please.
This is called "The Blind Man Who Only Saw Love." A blind man who only saw love would watch the bigger folk shove. As he strode on his path, this may give you a laugh. He smiled at the way that pain led the day. And the humans would shout at the few that got out of the chains in the street and the wrists and the feet of the downcast lot and the drunken sot they moan. He would look at a street that was spattered with blood. He's a laugh on the path, but he only saw love. There was fear in the air, but you'd know not when he's there. He could go into downtown, and while looking around at muggers and whores, leaning in doorways and store plays, thieves running in packs, it's not dollars they lack, but a bone in the back and a brain on the stack. A knife or a gun for just a little clean fun. With their fear, they infect. With their desperate neglect, it's the city's effect. Even children are infected. Not corrected, they just stare. So dark out there. But the blind man's still smiling. He's a grin in the wind. In the phone book he's dialing. Is it a number for prayer? Hey Zeus, are you there? Or just another ruse? An excuse to confuse. A black-horsed hearse. Getting worse. City course. But the blind man sees God. And he's thinking out loud. He sends loves and kisses from those to thises. God's not on the phone. And he isn't at home in the church. Don't you see? You won't set him free. You. But he's there and he's here. In downtown, in the country, in the trees, in the breeze, in cement, his intent everywhere. If you could see, you would stare. Seeing through vice, his blue eyes. Seeing in pain and the sky's crying rain, the loose fuse. In the pain, in the love, in the push, in the shove. Keep grinning. You're winning.
So it is quite a little bit what I was supposing before, if you remember, before, after you read the previous poem. I recognize here a Rick a little bit less terribilistic than in the 60s, but in the same time, the same fighter which was actually sustaining and supporting the same principles, but now formulated in a stylistically more refined way. It is the influence we were talking about of the media over the style of the writer. And because we are here, tell me please, do you feel the media influenced your writing style?
It does. It does. I have been trying to be more paper centric recently. And I notice that where I would, if I was writing a poem, for example, on the computer, the facility of editing, the facility of grabbing a phrase, relocating a phrase, trying a phrase out, reworking a phrase, it's so much more cumbersome on paper that I can't help but think that we gain a certain fluidity when we work in computerized, computer mediated writing. Um, I have to admit I do love it. It is facile. And the other thing, and I want to mention this because it was just reminded of this the other day. Um, Somebody was lamenting the fact that people spend so much time on their phones, right? And you can walk through a restaurant and you see two people staring at their phones and they're not interacting, right? And this is sad to most of us. And it was funny. While I would have normally given that reaction, said, "Oh my God, this is sad that we're losing the contact." But another thought struck me. Most times, now not always, but it seems to me most times when people are staring at a phone, they're not just having an interaction with the phone. They're interacting with some other person. It's really a computer mediated communication with the person. And for some, does it aid their alienation? Oh yeah, I'm sure it does. I'm absolutely sure of that. It does for some people reduce their ability to connect one to one. But I would argue, and I the adoption of the phone as a mediation communication tool would seem to support the idea that we're reaching out, we're making a network beyond who we are physically adjacent to, and we are having a deeper relationship, with people who, although physically further away, emotionally, mentally, tribally, we're much closer. I, I would, I would not want to give up my absolute affection and joy in spending a few minutes with you. If I had to say, well, next time I see him in person, I will talk to my friend Mircea. If I can only talk to you via computer, I'm happy with that. I'm absolutely fine with that. And I think of how much enriched we have become. You know, COVID giveth, COVID taketh away. Uh, COVID took away proximity, sharing space, but it gave us these international connections for not everyone. Granted, not everyone even understands the tools enough to talk to their neighbor. But for those of us who are facile with this media, oh my God, I think we've been enriched tremendously. So, yes, my brother, I think technology does impact very much what we write and how we write and what we write about.
A very interesting answer, in the same time unconventional and very complex, because 99% of the poets your age, my age, even younger, would say, oh, what a pity, we lost contact, and so on and so on. But actually, yes, actually we are very close in this way, and it is actually a very short possibility, or a very easy possibility of getting in contact, of changing minds, of changing ideas. Something we usually we wouldn't have been able before. And actually, this, yes, it changes it for sure. You argued very well that it influences our way of writing, and and it makes it, you were saying, more fluid. What about stylistically? How did you feel it? Are your rhymes, I don't know, let's say, more spontaneous, less spontaneous? Is this rhythm of your poems, because your poems are unthinkable without the rhythm, without the musicality, and without the rhymes? Do you think that media influence on one hand, and music influence from your youth and from today as well on another hand, made your poems, let's say, I don't know, because it is your style and you understand it the best, quicker, less quick, more fluid, less fluid, more impregnated but by those games of words so specific for you, or by contrary, more concrete, let's say more effective, or less effective? How do you feel it? Could you characterize, could you describe in a couple of words the way media and music influence your style?
Having been around technology a while, see, I didn't come to technology from a love of technology. I fell in love with light art. I met this wonderful commune of light artists called Lumonics. They're still around. Go to lumonics.net, everyone. Go to lumonics.net. But I studied with a gentleman named Mel Tanner, and he was a wonderful artist in light art. Uh, Imagine walking into a room, black shag rug, beanbag chairs scattered around, luminous sculptures all around the walls, projections of light, of words, of pictures around the room, and then a performance with those elements. And the sculptures pulsed. The bottoms of the sculptures pulsed to the low sounds. The middles of the sculptures pulsed to the mid sounds. The tops of the sculptures resounded and moved and modulated to the high sounds. So you were in this performance environment that was so immersive. Immersive is a poor, pale word. It was capturing you. And it combined words and colors and pictures, and I was enthralled. I went to him and I said, I got to study this. This is so amazing. This is beyond words. I was still in high school. I then evolved. I worked with another gentleman. I worked in a planetarium. I worked in a laser show. I was on a traveling light show. I got to do traveling laser shows. And I learned technology just to do better light shows. And so I found myself here as computers evolved from mainframe computers to personal computers, and then personal computers that only would show letters and numbers to then graphics, right? And I remember I went to a world conference of multimedia computers back in the mid 80s. And this gentleman said, no matter how wonderful the interface is, let's never forget that the best interface in the world is when you turn your chair around and you face a human being. And I have held that in my heart to remind me that no matter how whiz bang it is, I mean, look, we're telecommuting across the fucking globe. Holy smokes. That's amazing. But you know what? If some person who I care for walked in the room, that's a more valuable thing, no matter how marvelous it is. And not to in any way reduce your powerful impact on me as an artist, but I just wanted to say that everyone who uses technology for their art needs to kind of keep that bookmark, keep that page corner turned down to remind us that this is great, but the real stuff, skin to skin, face to face, lip to lip, that's the real stuff. Okay, so these tools definitely transform it. When I am writing now, I'm writing for an international audience. I'm writing not just about the parochial U.S. politics, but I'm thinking about the ramifications for someone in Eastern Europe, for someone in South Asia. When I think about freedom of speech, I'm not just thinking about, can I go to my local voting booth and express my opinion? I'm also thinking about that writer friend over in Singapore who's faced with a whole different dilemma, or some writer in Poland or the Czech Republic who's looking at, I mean, my God, that guy in Hungary, Orban.
Urban, yes.
You know, my friends, my beloved poet friends and writer friends in Poland, in Czech Republic, in Hungary, you're all in danger. We're all in danger from the hyper fascists. They use all kind of disguises now, but they want control. They don't want to hear our individual free voices. So we're all in danger. So when I write now, I'm not just thinking about the bozo governor of this state or that state or even the country of America. I'm a global citizen again. And I try to write with all my brothers and sisters in my mind and in my heart.
Once again, a very, very personal answer, because actually you included here not only the style matters, but also the way you are feeling, like a personal attitude as a kind of global reporter, as a kind of global observer, and being present everywhere and writing about you, what you feel those people need, what you feel those people are suffering of, and are artist by. A very interesting answer, which I think would deserve to be studied, maybe in a kind of course about seminary about journalistics, and the most refined way of answering some questions of the from the part of the interviewer. Dear Rick Spisak, poet of the three rivers, information sculptor, and global citizen, what about listening now about some of your most favorite poems? Because until now, somehow I pushed on you of reading those poems from different ages, because I somehow felt they deserved, and they are when people did not hear them, did not read them, and they deserve being read and being heard. So I'm trying to get my revenge, and not revenging, but I mean put I mean giving back what I brought from you, and kindly ask you to read for us some of the poems you would like to read, contemporary, new or less new. It is just about this. And I mean, until now, it was that were poems asked, more or less asked by me. Now, please read. What would you like us to hear today from your most beloved poems?
Well, thank you so much, brother. Uh, you're
Thank
you're
you.
you're a fine soul, and an honor always to speak to you. Um, Let me read a couple that are close to my heart now, and ones that I don't get a chance to recite very often. Let me read this one. It's called Bycatch, or Wastage. Many of us think more, I think, than have thought for a long time about how we use the resources of the planet. And there is an ugly, ugly word called bycatch that we don't think about often enough. And I've worked with people who've harvested from the sea, and it's an important concept. And here we go. Bycatch or wastage. I was recently told a story about shrimpers in their sea ride bouncing glory, living out at sea for a long month or two or three, always on the go, rushing ever through the boat, though the boat goes ever slow, trawling always, great nets set, charming the slopping sea, chugging, roiling, rolling through the waves, ever toiling, scruffy between the fretting nets, these mobile graves, dragging in the harvest tons, but little keeping, seeping, yet so much done and sleeping. I'm reminded they call it bycatch, all those dead sea creatures snatched, which never find a use, a trail of once sea life now refuse. So much bycatch were told and sold to find those scrawny, crawly nuggets gold. The tiny shrimp into a great 50 bag was sent to chill them quick our willful iced intent, and stick this marine decapod crustacean, long sought, our table dish its destination. By crawlers it's captured, later from the glassine goblets devoured, raptured. To catch this tiny thing, so much wastage does it bring. From the trawler, after all, a raining trail of corpses sink to fall. Just to add the toll, the blinkered lost biota think the trail of broken shards and shells and sharks and crabs that once deep hath dwelled, leaving now their reigning bodies, sadly pounced and poured, to see this sinking, stinking trail of death, that we of a cocktail might not be bereft.
Oh my God. I think it is the most effective, the most, and I'm saying in the best meaning of the word, the most sentimental echo poem I have ever heard. Wonderful,
Thank
Rick.
you.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
brother.
Let's
Um,
continue if you want.
okay, this is one of my favorites. This, you know, some of us still have parents. Some of us have lost our parents. Um, whenever I hear a woman diminished somehow by some callous fool, I think of how we are all the gifts of women. We all only exist because of their awful sufferance, because of their powerful love, because they were prepared to give everything. And that's why we're here. So I wrote this poem, and it's one very dear to my heart called The First Gifts. And I dedicate it to all the women in my life whose grace and beauty have touched my heart. The First Gifts. Yes, you welcomed those babes at your breast, gave them from your own life sustenance, thought first of them, their pleasure, their pain, their need, then some other, then yourself. You brought them through the most holy sacred gate they will ever enter into a world, into a human life. It can be readily said you gave them the very first gifts. Before the God at the cradle round bestowed those precious others, you clothed them in flesh, gave them their first form. What cells and man and fashion could give, you gave first. Before your gift, there was nothing, and your giving self made every other giving possible. When the first cry is heard, it calls your name. When each searching hand first reaches out, it reaches out for yours. When you press those tiny lips to your breast and smell those first tender breaths, those sweet garden scents are meant for you alone. As tiny fingers first begin the long, lonely search, they search first for you. Never is this new being more beautiful than when seen with your eye. Never is the kind of blessing given than that given from your eye and heart. No wonder the mother is so universally blessed. No wonder such special blessedness belongs first and last to mothers. She's given so much of her flesh and her heart, the first gifts.
Oh my God. Actually, Rick, this is the first poem I ever heard from you about, well, it's not the first poem of women, of course. No. It's, I mean, you have that wonderful poem about pandemic where you were separated by your love, by your wife, but it was something else. This is a kind of believing declaration to the women, all in all, and it reveals me a sensitive part of your soul which I didn't know. God, this is the evening of revelations. So let's continue. I think I'm going to have another 5 or 6 until the end of our interview.
Thank you, brother. You're very kind
Okay.
indeed. Okay, you know me. I love my science, and this is kind of one of my new science favorites. This is called 470 million miles. Dimorphos and Didymus, quite a pair. And though we thought we'd strike 'em, but would settle for a spare. Didymus, reconnaissance and asteroid camera for optical navigation, Draco is all it has. Its sole mission is to smash and give the asteroids a forceful pushy bash, speeding at Dimorphos 4 miles a second, Dart headed for its final destination with a kind of AI assisted arrival reservation, not to land, but just to wreck in. A very special kind of noisy check in. Racing to a rendezvous just to knock it about, and then we're through. Determined to shake and shout a tiny defensive earthquake make, 4 miles in 1 second makes quite an impact, or so it's reckoned, make no mistake. Dimorphos is the rendezvous, one tiny tap for mankind, a brutal slap, but it may be sublime, a journey through the deep distance mapped, planetary defense with an asteroid shoved from its position, relentlessly slapped. We're not opposed. We'd like to keep our current rent a special kind of frugal kind of defense. But twill it be measured just what service Dart has made it, or should we be nervous? The entire scheme a kind of sci-fi dream to push about from this tiny spot a chunk of heaven from 1 to 11. Dimorphos had many similarities to other asteroids our rockets have visited instead of avoided. That spaceship from Earth has gotten quite close looks at recently, particularly that it resembled a pile of rubbish, rather indecently. Can we maneuver a great space rock, despite all the destruction, give it a shock, even more damage than the right wing can do when they mock from their antique vantage? We'll see in the coming weeks when from all the space telescopes they send in their recent peaks.
Yeah, and actually, it is your point of view not only about your science, what you were mentioning, but also a moral and a human point of view towards the social and the political dimension of science, as I can understand. Rick, thank you very much, and please, if you want, if you agree, read now your most beloved poem, the one you love the most, the one you feel it belongs to you as much as the music, the three rivers, the information sculpture. I mean, like a science, like an art, not only like a personality, and all this bohem and artistic life of yours, which you described so beautifully during this interview. Please read a poem which would put all of this together thanks to your love to it, to this poem.
Well, thank you. That's a very tall order, but I'm going to pick one that I think expresses very much of what I think of as the best of me. This is called Temple Lion Dog, number 10. Temple Lion Dog. Flying o'er the temple zounds, I watched the sacred lion dog roam the garden fair and temple grounds. His patrol, punctuated with barks and growls, I watched in interest from high above, because you see that lion dog was also me. During his training to patrol this temple grounds, he'd been given special barks charmed with sacred magic sparks. Every bark a prayer, his barks profound. These sigils gleamed and glowed in the air. Full power beams unbounded blare. Sacred barks these powers made. From such sounds profound commandeth any shade. Few are aware the subtle war that shrieks beyond the temple door. Sweet in the temple souls seek solace, sanctuary, peace. That glory is only part of the story. Deep sounds profound, rich in power bound, the lion dog protects the souls that come for sanctuary amid the scrolls. Much more than solace, a palace so bright, a torch in the deep and sacred temple light. Yet, just outside, sometimes wicked ghouls would disturb the troubled sleep of souls who need the temple's sacred peace. When Lion Dog protects and guards the deep, while o'er I floor observed and watched, the Lion Dog patrolled and never stopped. My vantage point soared from high o'erspread, and suddenly pivoting, peering, darting deep inside the lion dog's head. I watched as dangerous spirits drifted past, almost to dare and try at last against the temple walls and gardens pierce, had not the sacred lion dog been so fierce. As lion dog, I strolled the garden's border, warned them off, sure they'd spawn some macabre disorder. Some might scoff as I watched the lion dog drive them off. These drifting spirits mischief sought would float by dreaming, lest the lion dog stop. The lion dog barked and warned them away. He'd flee his massive jaws, these shades would shrink before his awesome law, keeping demons from the grounds. This guardianship was more powerful than mortal eye might see, or any mortal ear bear sound. Which shades these wizards sent to temple to dissemble, that thereby acolytes might shriek and tremble, though the enemies of the temple crow and bray. That's why our patrolling lion dog in his sacred voices say, we are trained for courage, and on the sacred blessed food are nourished. Thus our strong walls protect us, that the temple might flourish, while I on guard our grounds from villain and demon, which I knew and sensed even when they were scarcely seen. The lion dog bounds across the grounds, patrolling the temple from any noisome sound. I watched as villains tried to worry, shake the gentle vibrations of this sacred place. While on patrol, I spotted villains near. I am bound to face them and shame their fear. My barking was marked in air by floating sacred sigils, like monks marking the ancient scrolls and vigils. These floated as if the marking barking signals. As lion dog, I marked the border. A sacred guardian protects the ancient order.
Oh my God. Yes, it is a kind of ending that pyramid, but nevertheless it doesn't. Your pyramid is, it still has to grow, because it's still a lot to say and a lot to hear about you and from you. Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you very much for this interview. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a privilege, a joy, and an honor for me to make this interview with not only the producer of Poets of the East, Rick Spisak, but also with the poet, the artist, the bohem, and in the same time, scientific, spiritual, and artistic person and intellectual person and personality, which Rick Spisak is. And I have to admit, I learned a lot from this interview, not only because of the very rich and complex life stories of Rick Spisak, but also because of the way he proved in in such such little words the way these different parts of art and different parts of the world are influencing between themselves, and in each way this influence can influence also us, all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is, for me, at least for me, Mircea Dan Duta, sometimes co-moderator, co-host, sometimes co-producer of Poets of the East, the most effective and the most personal episode I have taken part into, and I am grateful to Rick Spisak for all this. Rick Spisak, thank you for your poetry. Thank you for Poets of the East and for the whole example of a person, of a poet, and of an intellectual and artist you are. Ladies and gentlemen, Poets of the East, Rick Spisak.
Thank you so much, my brother. You,
Thank you, Rick.
I'm
And
honored to be with you as always.